My name is Rachel, and I am 34 years old. Right now, I stand here, a certified Uplift coach, speaking to you from a place of hard-won peace. But for a long time, my reality was defined by the constant hum of invalidation, particularly from the people who were supposed to be my greatest support, my family. They claimed I was too sad for this, too emotionally fragile, too damaged to ever build a life of purpose, much less guide others toward theirs. What happened next was even worse than the initial dismissal. They actively worked against me, seemingly determined to prove their hurtful assessment true. But I pushed through, and I want to tell you the full story of how I went from being told I was too sad for anything to becoming someone who helps others rise. Stick around, because it's a journey filled with pain, betrayal, and ultimately, reclaiming my own power. And if you've ever felt dismissed or told you weren't enough by the people closest to you, drop your location in the comments below so I know where you're listening from. If the feeling of exclusion or betrayal resonates with you, please hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about finding your voice and overcoming the narratives placed upon you, please make sure to subscribe. My story of being told I was too sad didn't begin with a single dramatic event, but rather a slow, insidious creep of darkness that enveloped me in my late 20s. It was a period following a significant breakup and a series of professional setbacks that left me feeling adrift and profoundly discouraged. The weight of these experiences settled upon me like a heavy shroud, dimming my natural light and leaving me feeling perpetually low. It wasn't just sadness, it was a deep weariness, a lack of motivation, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness that made even simple tasks feel monumental. I withdrew from friends, neglected hobbies I once loved, and spent countless hours simply existing, watching the world pass by my window. This wasn't just a bad mood. It felt like a fundamental shift in my being, a descent into a state where joy felt like a foreign concept. I knew something was wrong, but I struggled to name it, let alone articulate it to others. The energy required to fake being okay felt unbearable, so I mostly stopped trying. I canceled plans, avoided phone calls, and retreated into the quiet, isolating space of my own apartment. Sleep offered little respite, often punctuated by anxious thoughts or disturbed by vivid, unpleasant dreams. My physical health began to suffer as well. I lost weight, my skin looked sallow, and I felt perpetually tired, regardless of how much I slept. This period was, without exaggeration, the darkest I had ever known. It was a time of profound internal struggle, where the simplest act of getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. I was lost in a wilderness of my own making, or perhaps more accurately, a wilderness that life's storms had deposited me into. My thoughts were often clouded, making it hard to concentrate or make decisions. The future seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, a vast, gray expanse devoid of possibility or promise. I was living, but I wasn't thriving. I wasn't even truly functioning in any meaningful sense. I was merely enduring, waiting for an unknown force to lift me out of the mire, a force I now realize I had to find within myself, but at the time felt utterly incapable of summoning. The world outside continued its vibrant, bustling existence, a stark contrast to the muted, stagnant landscape of my internal world. It felt like everyone else was moving forward, living their lives, while I was stuck, frozen in time, unable to break free from the invisible chains of my own despair. This wasn't a fleeting melancholy. It was a pervasive, debilitating state that affected every aspect of my existence, from my physical health to my mental clarity and emotional resilience. I felt like a shadow of my former self, barely recognizable even to myself. It was during this period of vulnerability that my family's response began to surface, initially subtly, then with increasing clarity and impact. My parents, while perhaps not intentionally malicious at first, seemed utterly incapable of understanding the depth of my struggle. Their attempts to help often felt like dismissals or, worse, veiled criticisms. I remember one early conversation with my mother on the phone. I was trying to explain how hard it was to just function, to find motivation. She listened for a moment, then sighed. "Well, Rachel, she said, her voice tinged with impatience. You just need to snap out of it. You're dwelling too much, snap out of it? As if sadness were a switch I could simply flip off. Her words felt like a punch to the gut, invalidating the very real pain I was experiencing. My father was more pragmatic, or so he believed. He'd suggest I just get a job, any job, or go out and meet people. He couldn't seem to grasp that the lack of motivation wasn't about laziness or unwillingness. It was a symptom of a deeper issue that had stolen my energy and interest in the world. Their inability to empathize stemmed, I now understand, from their own discomfort with difficult emotions. They preferred neat, tidy narratives, and my prolonged state of distress didn't fit. It disrupted their picture of a successful, capable daughter. Instead of offering genuine support or seeking to understand, they began to interpret my struggles through a lens of personal failing. My withdrawal became laziness, my inability to function normally became drama, and my sadness became a character flaw, a fundamental weakness. This misinterpretation fueled their subsequent actions and, eventually, their explicit declarations about my capabilities. I confided in my sister, hoping for a different response, but she seemed to have absorbed some of the same dismissive attitude. She told me I was making things harder than they needed to be and suggested I was enjoying the attention my sadness brought. Attention? I was hiding from the world, mortified by my own state. This comment stung deeply, feeling like a complete lack of understanding from someone I thought would be an ally. The comments grew more pointed and frequent. Any time I expressed a glimmer of interest in a potential project, a course, or even a simple social outing, it was met with skepticism rooted in my perceived emotional state. I mentioned wanting to volunteer at an animal shelter once, hoping the interaction with animals might help. My mother's immediate response was, "Oh, Rachel, I don't know if you're stable enough for that right now. Those poor animals, they need someone cheerful." The implication was clear. My sadness was a contagion, something that would harm anything I touched. It felt isolating and deeply unfair. Another time, I was considering applying for a part-time job that required some customer interaction. My father looked doubtful. "Are you sure you can handle that, sweetie? You get so overwhelmed easily these days," he didn't say sad, but the context, their constant framing of my state as a fundamental weakness, made it implicit. They saw my sadness not as a temporary, treatable condition I was struggling through, but as an intrinsic part of who I was, a defect that rendered me incapable. This perception permeated every interaction, every suggestion, every piece of unsolicited advice. It wasn't just about their lack of support, it was about their active creation of a narrative that limited my potential and undermined my efforts to heal. They weren't just failing to lift me up, they were actively pushing me down, reinforcing the idea that I was inherently flawed and incapable because of my emotional state. This constant barrage of subtle and not-so-subtle dismissals began to erode my already fragile self-esteem. Their words echoed the negative self-talk that was already prevalent in my mind. If the people who knew me best, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, believed I was too sad, too unstable, too incapable, then maybe it was true. Maybe I was fundamentally broken. This was the most damaging aspect of their response. They weren't just observing my sadness, they were defining me by it and using it as justification to limit my world and my potential. When I finally started seeking professional help, seeing a therapist and exploring medication, their reaction was mixed and still tainted by their narrative. They acknowledged I was getting help, but it didn't immediately erase their perception of me as fundamentally fragile. "Well, it's good you're talking to someone," my mother said after my first therapy session, "but don't expect miracles overnight. These things take a long time, and some people are just more sensitive than others." Again, the underlying message was that my condition was perhaps inherent, not something I could fully overcome. The true depth of their belief, the moment the "you're too sad for this" narrative became an explicit tool of limitation and control, occurred when I started exploring the possibility of pursuing coaching. I had begun to see flickers of light, small improvements thanks to therapy and my own determined efforts. I was reading extensively about personal development, resilience, and the power of mindset. The idea of using my own difficult experiences to help others resonated deeply. It felt like a way to transform my pain into purpose. I was excited, nervous, but genuinely hopeful for the first time in a long time. I tentatively shared this budding interest with my parents during a family dinner. I spoke about the positive psychology I was learning, the potential to empower people, the structure of coaching programs. I could see their faces fall, a mixture of confusion and skepticism clouding their expressions. My father was the first to voice their collective doubt. He put down his fork and looked at me with that paternalistic, concerned frown he reserved for what he deemed my impractical ideas. Coaching, Rachel? You? But you've been so down lately. How could you possibly help other people when you can barely manage yourself? My mother quickly jumped in, her voice dripping with what she probably thought was gentle concern, but felt like pure condescension. Honey, that's a very demanding field. You need to be strong, optimistic, constantly uplifting. Happy. And let's be honest, you haven't exactly been the picture of happiness lately, have you? She didn't say the exact words, too sad for this, but the implication was deafeningly clear. They believed my recent history of depression had permanently disqualified me from a role that required emotional strength and positivity. They weren't just questioning my current state, they were using my past vulnerability to predict my future failure. It was a judgment, a sentence passed on my potential based on a chapter of my life I was actively trying to move beyond. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken accusations and stifled dreams. My sister, present at the dinner, remained silent, offering no defense or encouragement, her silence a form of tacit agreement with our parents' assessment. Their words weren't just discouraging, they felt like a deliberate attempt to extinguish the fragile spark of hope that had finally ignited within me. It was an act of profound invalidation, coming at a moment when I desperately needed belief, not doubt. Their resistance wasn't just verbal. As I began researching certification programs and exploring the practical steps to becoming a coach, their skepticism morphed into active obstruction. They would leave articles about the high failure rate of small businesses lying around, seemingly accidentally. My mother would call and recount cautionary tales of people who pursued their passions and ended up penniless. "It's just so risky, Rachel," she'd say, "especially when you're not exactly in the strongest place right now. Maybe you should focus on getting a nice, stable office job first." Something easy. The message was relentless. Play it safe, stay small, acknowledge your supposed limitations, which, in their view, were inextricably linked to my history of sadness. They seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the idea of me stepping into a role of authority or guidance. It challenged their established narrative of me as the fragile, sensitive one who needed protecting, or perhaps more accurately, managing. They had grown accustomed to me being in a vulnerable state, and my emergence from it, particularly into a role that contradicted their perception, felt threatening to their understanding of our family dynamic. This struggle for validation extended beyond my career choice. Any decision I made independently, any boundary I tried to set, was met with resistance or framed through the lens of my supposed emotional instability. I decided to move into my own apartment after living with them temporarily during my lowest point. My father argued I wasn't ready for the responsibility, hinting that my moods would make it hard for me to manage. My mother insisted I needed to be closer to them so they could keep an eye on me. It felt suffocating. They weren't supporting my steps towards independence. They were actively trying to prevent them, using my past as justification for their control. This period was a constant battle, not just against my internal struggles, but against the external narrative my family was determined to impose upon me. It was exhausting, fighting for my right to define myself, to heal, and to grow beyond their limited perception. Every step forward felt like wading through thick mud, with their voices echoing in my ears, reminding me of my perceived weaknesses. I started to question myself again. Were they right? Was I foolish to think I could overcome such deep-seated sadness and become someone who could help others? The doubt they sowed was insidious, taking root in the fertile ground of my past vulnerability. The turning point didn't come in a single, dramatic epiphany, but rather a slow, dawning realization fueled by my therapy sessions and my own research into resilience and self-compassion. I started to understand that my sadness wasn't a definition, but an experience. It was something I went through, not something I fundamentally was. And crucially, I realized that my experience with navigating deep emotional pain gave me a unique perspective and empathy that someone who had never struggled might lack. This realization was transformative. It flipped the script on their narrative. My history of sadness wasn't a liability, it was a qualification. Who better to help someone navigate darkness than someone who had found their own way into the light? My therapist helped me see that my family's reaction was less about me and more about their own fears and inability to cope with my pain. Their dismissiveness was a defense mechanism, a way to distance themselves from something uncomfortable and overwhelming. It didn't excuse their behavior, but understanding its roots helped me depersonalize it slightly and shift my focus from seeking their validation to validating myself. I began to view their doubts not as reflections of my inadequacy, but as projections of their own limitations. This shift in perspective was like opening a window in a stuffy room, allowing fresh air and clarity to flood in. The idea of becoming an Uplift coach solidified from a tentative interest into a firm resolve. It wasn't just a career choice anymore. It was an act of defiance, a reclaiming of my narrative, and a powerful statement that my experiences, even the painful ones, had value and could be used for good. I enrolled in a certified coaching program, pouring my energy and focus into it. It wasn't easy. There were days when the old doubts would creep in, fueled by memories of my family's words. But I held on to the core belief that my journey had equipped me, not disqualified me. I connected with fellow students who shared similar motivations, people who understood the power of turning challenges into strengths. This community provided the support system I desperately needed, a stark contrast to the resistance I faced at home. My family continued their passive-aggressive campaign. My mother would make pointed comments about the cost of the program, hinting it was a waste of money. My father would ask about my job prospects in a tone that suggested he expected none. They never explicitly forbade me from pursuing coaching, but their lack of support and constant undercurrent of doubt were draining. Building my coaching business from the ground up was challenging, requiring immense effort and resilience. There were moments of self-doubt, exacerbated by my family's persistent lack of faith. When I got my first few paying clients, small victories I was incredibly proud of, sharing the news with my parents was met with muted responses and immediate questions about how much money I was making, framed in a way that implied it couldn't possibly be significant or sustainable. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, then immediately pivot to discussing the stable careers of my cousins. Their inability to celebrate my progress felt like another form of betrayal. They couldn't acknowledge my success because it directly contradicted the narrative they had built about me. It was easier for them to minimize my achievements than to confront the possibility that they had been wrong about me, that my sadness hadn't broken me, but had perhaps even made me stronger in unexpected ways. I learned to stop seeking their approval or even sharing significant milestones with them. Their reactions were predictable and painful, and protecting my own emotional well-being became paramount. I started building boundaries, limiting conversations about my work, and politely shutting down their negative commentary. It was a necessary step, albeit a sad one, acknowledging that the support I needed wouldn't come from them, at least not in the way I had always hoped. This period solidified my resolve. Their attempts to keep me small and confined only fueled my determination to grow and prove them wrong, not for their validation, but for my own. The climax of this emotional journey, the moment I finally articulated my truth and set explicit boundaries, happened during a planned family gathering, a seemingly innocuous Sunday lunch that became the stage for years of simmering resentment and unaddressed pain. I had been building my coaching practice, finding my footing, and perhaps most importantly, finding my voice. I was no longer the fragile person they had defined. I was stronger, more confident, and unwilling to carry their limiting beliefs any longer. The conversation drifted, as it often did, towards careers and future plans. My sister mentioned a secure job a friend of hers had just gotten, and my father immediately chimed in. See, Rachel? That's the kind of stability a young woman needs. Not these. These uncertain ventures. He glanced pointedly at me. A clear jab at my coaching business. My mother added, "It's just practical, dear. Especially considering." Well, everything, the unspoken, everything, hung in the air, my past struggles, their narrative of my instability. A wave of anger, sharp and clear, washed over me. Years of invalidation, dismissal, and subtle sabotage crystallized into a single, undeniable truth. I couldn't continue to let them define me or undermine my life. I took a deep breath, the kind that steadies your nerves before a difficult conversation. "I need to say something," I began, my voice trembling slightly at first, but gaining strength as I went on. Their attention snapped towards me, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. "For years," I continued, looking directly at my parents, "I've listened to you talk about me, about my life choices, always through the lens of what you think I'm capable of, or more accurately, what you think I'm not capable of, because I went through a hard time. You told me I was too sad, too fragile, too unstable for so many things. Too sad for this job, too sad for that volunteer work, too sad to live alone, and definitely too sad to be a coach." I saw their faces shift, defensiveness, discomfort, a flicker of something that might have been guilt, quickly masked. My father started to interrupt. "Now, Rachel, that's not fair. We just wanted dash." "No." I cut him off, my voice firm now. "Let me finish. It is fair. That is exactly what you did, with your comments, your helpful suggestions, your constant doubt. You took a difficult period in my life and used it to build a narrative that limited me, that told me I wasn't strong enough, that I was fundamentally flawed." My mother's eyes welled up, a tactic she often used to deflect criticism. "We were just worried about you, Rachel," she said softly. "We saw how much you were hurting." "Worried is one thing," I countered, "but actively undermining my confidence and my choices is another. You didn't support me in finding my way out of the darkness. You seemed determined to keep me there, or at least to ensure I never ventured too far from the box you had put me in. Every time I tried to take a step forward, you reminded me of my sadness, not to offer comfort, but to question my capability." I looked at my sister. "And you?" I said, my voice softer but no less firm. "You stood by and let it happen, sometimes even adding your own dismissals." She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I am not too sad for my life," I declared, the words feeling powerful as I spoke them aloud. "I was sad, deeply so, and I worked incredibly hard to move through it. And guess what? That experience, that struggle, didn't make me weaker. It made me stronger. It gave me empathy. It gave me perspective. It equipped me to do exactly what you said I couldn't: help other people who are struggling. My coaching isn't despite my sadness. In many ways, it's because of it. Because I understand what it feels like to be lost and to find your way back." My father was visibly uncomfortable. "Well, we didn't mean it like that. You're exaggerating." "Am I?" I challenged. "Do you remember telling me I wasn't stable enough to volunteer at the animal shelter? Do you remember asking me if I could handle a simple part-time job? Do you remember sitting right here and questioning how I could possibly help others when I had been so down?" I didn't raise my voice, but the weight of the specific examples hung heavy in the air. Those weren't isolated comments. That was a pattern of using my vulnerability to keep me small. "We wanted you to be happy," my mother interjected, tears now flowing freely. "And do you think telling me I was fundamentally incapable because of my emotions made me happy?" I asked, genuinely wanting them to consider the impact of their words. It did the opposite. It reinforced the negative thoughts I was already fighting. It made me feel like I was broken beyond repair, and that even the people who loved me believed that. I paused, letting the silence stretch. This wasn't easy. Every part of me wanted to retreat, to apologize for causing a scene, to smooth things over. But the larger part, the stronger part one had cultivated, knew this needed to be said. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said, though a part of me desperately wished they were capable of offering a genuine one. "What I am telling you is that I cannot continue to have these conversations, to feel this constant judgment. My life is my own, and my past struggles are not a weapon to be used against me or a justification to limit my future. I am building a life and a career that I am proud of, a career where I use my experience to help others. If you cannot support that, if you cannot see me as capable and resilient, then we are going to have a different kind of relationship. I looked them each in the eye. I need you to understand that the narrative stops now. I am not too sad for anything. My feelings are valid, my experiences are valuable, and my capabilities are for me to discover and define, not for you to limit. The confrontation ended not with a clean resolution, but with a stunned silence, followed by a strained attempt to return to the meal, the air thick with unspoken accusations and lingering emotional fallout. The truth had been spoken, but it hadn't magically healed anything. My parents were defensive and clearly hurt by my accusations, unable or unwilling to truly see the impact of their actions. My sister remained withdrawn. The drive home was quiet and heavy. In the days that followed, there was a palpable distance. Phone calls were shorter, interactions stilted. This wasn't the dramatic reconciliation I might have fantasized about, where they suddenly understood and apologized profusely. It was messier, quieter, and perhaps more realistic. The dynamic had shifted, undeniably, but the shift was born of conflict, not consensus. Setting boundaries after that confrontation was essential, but incredibly difficult. It meant consciously choosing to distance myself from their negativity and control, even when it felt counterintuitive to my ingrained desire for their approval. It meant learning to say no to requests that encroached on my time or energy, especially if those requests came with implicit expectations or judgments. It meant limiting how much I shared about my professional successes, not because I was hiding, but because I knew their reactions would likely be more discouraging than celebratory. For instance, when I landed a significant coaching contract, instead of sharing the details, I simply mentioned I was busy with work. My mother commented that it sounded like a lot of stress, and maybe I was taking on too much. Instead of defending myself, I simply said, "I'm managing it well, thanks," and changed the subject. These small acts of resistance were draining, but necessary. They were constant reminders that the old patterns were still there, but I was no longer participating in them in the same way. It felt like I was learning a new language of interaction with them, a language of quiet assertion and polite deflection rather than seeking validation or openly challenging their worldview. There were moments of doubt, days when their persistent lack of faith would gnaw at me, making me question my choices and my strength. But then I would work with a client, witness their own breakthroughs, and receive their heartfelt gratitude, and it would reinforce why I was doing this. Their positive feedback became a powerful counter-narrative to my family's doubt. The validation I wasn't getting from my family, I was receiving in abundance from the people I was helping. Each successful coaching session, each positive testimonial, was a quiet triumph, a testament to my resilience and capability. It wasn't just about proving my family wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was strong, capable, and worthy, regardless of my past struggles or their limited perception. My journey from being labeled too sad to becoming an Uplift coach is more than just a career change. It's a testament to the power of redefining yourself and refusing to let others write your story. I embraced my past, not as a flaw, but as a source of strength and empathy. The very experiences my family saw as disqualifying became the bedrock of my coaching practice. I understand the weight of sadness, the paralysis of despair, and the courage it takes to seek light. This understanding allows me to connect with my clients on a deeper level, offering not just strategies, but genuine empathy and belief in their potential. Today, my relationship with my family is different. It's marked by boundaries and a degree of emotional distance that is sometimes painful, but ultimately necessary for my well-being. We have a cordial, albeit less intimate, connection. They no longer make overt comments about my sadness or question my capabilities as a coach directly, perhaps because my continued success makes their doubts seem increasingly unfounded, or perhaps because they know I will no longer tolerate such commentary. The narrative has shifted not because they fully understand or apologize, but because I changed my response and built a life that speaks for itself. Becoming an Uplift coach wasn't just about finding a profession, it was about finding myself. It was about transforming a period of deep pain into a source of purpose and connection. It taught me the profound importance of validating your own feelings, trusting your own strength, and defining your worth from within, rather than seeking it in the approval of others, even family. Thank you for listening to my story. It took a lot for me to share this, but I believe there is power in speaking our truth, especially when it challenges painful narratives. If you have ever felt dismissed or misunderstood by your family, I encourage you to share a bit of your experience in the comments below. Let's build a space of support and understanding. If my journey resonated with you, if you connected with the struggle for validation or the idea of turning pain into purpose, please hit that like button. It truly helps. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating difficult relationships, finding your voice, and reclaiming your power, don't forget to subscribe. Remember, your experiences, your feelings, your truth, they are all valid, and you are capable of far more than anyone else's doubt might suggest. Keep going. Keep growing. Your strength is your own.